He's the author of Eirik the Red, whom we are going to discuss today, and rather a hidden figure in the Viking saga. And of course, I want to begin with how did you stumble upon this guy? Because like I said, he's kind of hidden from history, and as you mentioned in the book, he's kind of just 40 lines, more or less written, a mini saga, in other words. So, how did you were going to write about a different person, but how did you stumble upon this guy? Of all places, and I forgot to say, by the way, this my guest is Øystein Morten. I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce you there, but let's begin with how did you stumble upon Eirik the Red, or Eirik Raude, as it's known in Norwegian?
Well, I wrote a book some years ago about the king Olaf Tryggvason, who Christianized Norway, and this guy Leif Eirikson from Greenland. He was he was one of his men, and Olaf Tryggvason, he sent this Leif, and he was the son of Eirik the Red, who discovered Greenland. He sent him to Greenland to Christianize Greenland, and of course he drifted off course and discovered America instead. So as a follow-up of that book, I wanted to write about Vinland. That was the expression they call this land west of Greenland that we call America. And but first I had to find something out about Greenland and the Norse colony in Greenland, because that was the starting point of the Vinland expeditions. And then I had to read about and try to figure out who was the father of Leif the Lucky. They call him in English, Eirik the Red. And the material just grew out. So I had to write a book about Eirik the Red first.
And what do you think made it just that? Because it's in this discovery, and you use that rather, there's two words, as you mentioned in the beginning as well, that you use rather ironically, that is discovery and Viking. So, quote unquote, how did what do you think makes him so unknown, since the discovery of Greenland is rather significant in history?
In one way, Greenland, it's a part of America. See, when you discover Greenland, you discover America.
Right.
Geographically, is no doubt about that, and culturally as well. But discovered, in Greenland, it's been living people there for thousands and thousands of years. So when you say you discover it, it's just from an European point of view.
Right.
And they settled in an area of Greenland that was with no people at the time. This was in 980, in the 980s. So but Greenland today is a kind of a nowhere place. It's only 50,000 people living there. It's a remote part of Denmark. So you don't reckon it as this discovery of America, which it is. So that's why I think Eirik the Red is not that important. But when his son, Leif Eirikson, comes to Canada, it's much more important, because Canada is so much more important for us today than Greenland.
Right.
But Greenland, it's the world's largest island, but no population almost. And I think that's why I think if Eirik the Red had just crossed over to Canada, he would have been the great figure here, I think. So, well, and another thing is that some says that he it was not possible to be proud of this Eirik the Red because he was a serial killer. But I think that is very wrong. If you call him a serial killer, you haven't understood the sagas at all.
Right, and let's start with that because, as you mentioned in the introduction, he does seem kind of like a troublemaker if he managed to get expelled from 2 different countries at the time. But let's begin with Norway and his banishment from Norway. Because it starts with a murder, as you mentioned.
It's only one sentence in the saga. It says half a sentence that says something about this. It says that Eirik and his father Thorvald, they were involved in Norse Viga Sakar, and it means that they were involved in some killings. That's all. And then you have to find out what kind of people is this, and you have to follow their ancestors. And you see this is the chieftains of Norway, big people. And if they are and killing people, it's this is a society without a state, no police. So you have to be able to kill people to defend yourself and your family
and your honor, of course.
And you have to defend your honor. You have to be respected. If someone tries to humiliate you, you have to strike back, and you have to strike hard to build your own honor. So when these people, chieftains, are involved in killings, it just means there's a struggle for power in this part of Norway, in the southwestern Norway, and they lose this struggle, and they then have to leave Norway because of their honor. They don't want to be humiliated and be underneath other chieftains.
Right.
So because it's about keeping your honor and keeping your freedom, and that's why they leave. They sell their farm. They leave for Iceland.
Well, was it shameful to leave for a different country at the time, or did it just was it like kind of like start of something new, a new beginning?
Yeah, this is the land taking area period. So what people from Norway did, if they lost some battles or duels or lost their freedom in Norway, these were rich people. They could go out in big Viking ships and to areas out in the Atlantic with no population, and they could take land because there were no one there before.
Free real estate.
So yeah, and they in Iceland they call them landnomsmenn, land taking men. And they could take land thousands of kilometers, and claim it their own, and they could start from zero, and together all these chieftains, they form a free state without a king,
right?
No one over them, and they cooperate in the ting. And in the parliament, they got a loose kind of parliament in Iceland. So these are not poor people. These are not serial killers. These are not criminals. They just lose the struggle for power in Norway. But this is when they leave from Norway. Eirik the Red and his father Thorvald, I think it is around 960.
Right.
And it's most of Iceland is taken then by other chieftains. So they take some land far up in the north, in the northwest, an area we call Strandir or Holstrandir. In the book I write about me and my son, we try to get up there, but it's no roads today, and it's no electricity. No one lives up there today. So it was too hard. This was in the winter. We tried to walk up there, but it was we ended up in a blizzard, and
And this
had
was right
to-
before COVID as well, so you had to
yeah,
really limited time at the.
yeah. We tried to get there. It was just some some days before they closed the country.
Mm.
So this is far up north, in Iceland, and with very strong winters. So that's where it started. His I think he must have been. He was involved in killings in Norway with his father, and when they write that, he must have be more than 12 years old to be involved in killings in a legal sense. So I think he was probably maybe 15 years old when they moved from southwestern Norway to Iceland.
And it's worth mentioning too that 12 years old was considered adult, and you were an adult at the time in the Viking age. At that age, so he was considered more or less a man at that era.
Yes, because he could be punished for killing a man when he was more than 12 years old. But again, often it was just to pay off, say yes, it was me, and you have to pay a fine for the killing, and it was okay. So yes, he was a grown up. He was at least 12 years old when they moved from Norway to Iceland.
So how when they arrive in Iceland? But first, I want to ask, what would the journey be like for traveling from? Because when you went there, you took the ferry, but it took significantly shorter than with the Viking ship. So, but how long time did it take for a Viking ship to reach from Norway to Iceland? And I actually discussed this with my family as well before, when I was younger, that the continental shift must have been different back then as well, right? So we had to take that into consideration. Was there much difference in continental movements at all compared to 1,000 years later, like today?
Well, if you take the ferry today, you take it with a car from Denmark now, then to Iceland. It's more or less the same route, and it's a bit quicker. But the way they did it was to go from land to land, because so first they would cross over to Shetland, and would take them about, I think, well, in the book, 2 days, about 40 hours, something like that. So not too far, really. If you would go from southwestern Norway, Rogaland, and into Viking to Oslo, it would be a lot further. So it was not considered that long. You could do it in 40 hours, no big deal. And of course, only in summer, not in winter, not in the winter storm. You would never sail, only in summer. And the sea probably was better in summer in 960 than today. So it would be easier in that sense. And from Shetland, you crossed over to the Faroe Islands, and another, I guess, more or less the same distance. So another 40 hours, 40 hours. And then the long crossing would be from the Faroe Islands over to Iceland. So maybe something like 48, 50, 60 hours, something like that.
So 3-4 days, more or less.
Yeah, well, I could probably, you would use 6 days. I would guess 5 or 6 days. So, but it was not considered that far, really. The problem was that you had to orient yourself by the sun, by the stars, by following the wind, the waves. Also, but if it was a storm and very foggy, you could drift off. It was quite normal. So you could end up anywhere. So it was very risky. Not that far, but very, very risky. So a lot of people did this all the time. Merchants, they would go from Iceland to Norway every year. So in 960, this was not considered something very special, because then Iceland was populated, and they needed these merchants to go back and forth from Norway all the time.
Right. So what did they do when they first settled in Iceland? Because we'll get there eventually, but they do get in trouble there as well, which is why they had to move again. But let's talk about their time in Iceland first.
Yes, they take land and they settle in a farm called the Drangar, which is still exists, but it's only used in the summer now. The only thing we know about this period is that his father died there. That's only one sentence in the saga of Eirik the Red. But it's far up north, and they must have been hunting, fishing, a lot of these things. Maybe they hunted the walrus, whales, things like that, and probably, I would guess, Eirik the Red, he lived there until he was 25 years old, from 12, 15 until 25 years old. But we don't know much about that. When his father dies, he moves south to the Breidafjordur region and to a valley called Haukadalur. It's in the big fjord in western Iceland, and a valley just beneath the fjord. And he marries a woman called Shodhild. And then they settle in a farm on the land of his father-in-law, who is a chieftain in the area. Here you can still visit his house, because they found the remainders of his house, and they built a copy of it, and it's called Eiríksstaðir. So he's not a big man, it's not a big house either, and he just had to borrow some land from his father-in-law, who is a quite big chieftain. Then the trouble starts, because this is a society with slaves. So his slaves, it says, starts a landslide, who more or less crush one of his neighboring farms, and it kills a man, kills one of his neighbors.
I assume this wasn't intentional. This was unintentional murders.
I think it must have been just an accident. So, but then another neighbor, which is the cousin of the man who got killed in the landslide, he kills Eirik's slaves. And that's when the trouble starts. And I have to say, this is nothing to do with being a criminal or a serial killer or something. More or less, Eirik, he does what he's supposed to do, because when his slaves are killed, these people, they are comparable to animals.
Right.
If you kill a slave, you have to replace it. Or you have to pay a fine the same price as the slave. And this neighbor, he's supposed to do that within 3 days. To come with a silver or anything that you could replace Eirik's slaves. But his neighbor, who is called Eyjolfur, he says that no, I won't pay the fine, because it was my right to kill your slaves, because they killed my relative. And then, to protect his own honor, Eirik, it's not possible for him just to sit still and say, okay. Because he's got to protect himself, his family, And if people start saying, "Oh, he's just weak. You could just kill his slaves. You could do anything with this man," and he's just borrowed some land from his father-in-law, so he's got to strike back. So he goes over to Eyjolfur, his neighbor, and says, "You have to pay." And probably an argument. It ends with that Eirik he kills this man, his neighbor, and then the family of the two killed men, the one from the landslide and his cousin, they have to strike back. You know, they have to revenge this, and they do it by hiring a man called Holmgangsravn, and Holmganger is a form of duel in this period. When two men that transported to a small island in a lake or a river or something, and they fight each other until first blood or until death. And they are transported to this small island in the river, Eirik the Red and this hired man, Holmgangsravn. And Eirik he kills him. But then he's on a meeting after that. He's got a sentence over him that he's an outlaw from Haukadalur.
Right.
He's got to disappear from the valley. He can't stay at his home anymore. So he leaves with his men, and then he takes land out in the big fjord in Breidafjordur. He takes 2 islands out there. But that also means that he's involved in some trouble, because he takes these 2 islands, I think, because there's a quarrel between some chieftains about this area in the fjord, who owns it. So he involves himself in another quarrel, and well, it's quite complicated. But the first fall, winter is coming when he's thrown out of Haukadalur, and he tries to establish himself on the islands, but he doesn't got time to build a house. So you have to borrow a house of another chieftain, and he's taking some very valuable logs that belongs to his Eirik's high seat. And the other chieftain said, "Yeah, you can borrow my house, but then I need your logs. I have to take them as a safety. And when you come back, you don't need my house anymore. I will give you your high seat logs back again." And Eirik he builds a house on his own island, and then the year after he wants these logs back. But then the other chieftain, he says, "No, you're not getting them." And it's quite mysterious why, but I think it's got to be something about a quarrel about who owns these islands. But then Eirik he takes his logs, and he goes down to the fjord. But then the chieftain, so he comes after him with his sons and his men, and there's a battle, and Eirik he wins this battle, and he kills 2 of the sons of the chieftain, and that's why he's after that he's thrown out of Iceland in the Thing meeting. He's sentenced to being an outlaw. That is, he's outside the law, and anyone could kill him. And anyone who kills him as very honorable, and it's forbidden to help him. It's forbidden to help him to go anywhere. So often these people being outlawed for 3 years, they would just go up in the mountains, or just hide away in a cabin, or something like that. So because you were sentenced to living outside society. And
It seems rather fair, though, considering he was the one who was agitated, and he had kind of, in quote, rights to kind of kill this man, but he's the one who gets punished for it. It seems kind of a little bit unfair, not to lie to you.
Yeah, but this is not a fair society. This is a struggle between chieftains, and it's about who's got the most power, who's going to win a war if you start a war, and and they meet in this Torsnes thing, which is kind of a local parliament, and it's not about what is fair. It's what it's about where the power is.
Right.
So. This chieftain that Eirik has killed his son, he's got very powerful friends, and that was what it's all about. And he may say that Eirik, he took these islands, but he had no right to them, because one of these islands were mine, and he had just to stand up for himself,
right?
Because his view of it would be, I cannot take this man Eirik is a stranger. He was thrown out of Haukadalur. I can just let him take these islands just outside my fields. So he too had to protect his own honor, and his friends were more powerful than Eirik's friends. And when they meet at the local parliament, then you think, okay, if you start a war here, who's going to win? And say, well, the other chieftain, he's going to win. Okay, then we just try to settle it, because we don't want to start a war. So this is how democracy works in this period. It's got more or less nothing to do with democracy in our days. So then the problem now is he's thrown out of Norway, and he's thrown out of Iceland. But all the time he just tried to do what is expected of a man, or a big man in this area. So in one way, he did nothing wrong. But he then thinks that, well, and this is very important, not just for him, but also for his sons. He's now got 2 sons, the famous Leif and Thorstein, the oldest one. And when they're going to present themselves, they will say, "Who are you?" "Well, I'm Leif, son of Eirik the Red, the son of etc." And I would put, "Eirik the Red? Oh, the man who got total humiliated, thrown out of Norway, thrown out of Iceland, didn't make it anywhere, thrown out of Haukadalur." And this would have been so disgraceful for his sons and his grandsons. So he had to do something,
right,
to protect and raise his own honor. And
but is his sons as well, when it's outlawed, are they immediately followed as outlaws as well, or are they kind of outside?
No. It says in the sentence that it's Eirik and his men, and that's his that means he's himself and his closest men, the workers on his farm, and the man who was involved in this small battle with the chieftain in Breidafjordur.
Right.
So it's probably Eirik himself and maybe 10, 12 men, something like that. And they are all outlawed for 3 years. And then it is that Eirik, he has heard, and all the people has heard about something they called the Gunnbjørn scaries. It's a story about a Norwegian. He was visiting his brother in Iceland, and he drifted off course and ended up far over the sea to the west, and he was stranded on some skerries. And then when the storm was over, he tried to sail straight east to hit Iceland again. But then, when he just started, the fog was racing, and he saw it was a big land behind him, and that was Greenland. That was America. So this Gunnbjørn Ulfsson, he's the first man discovering America, really, if you call it America geographical area.
So it wasn't a coincidence that he came and stumbled upon. He just didn't accidentally just, oh, let's just sail somewhere and hope he stumbled upon some unknown land. He just kind of he knew about it. He was aware of the island.
And he knew where to sail, because this Gunnbjørn said, I from these skerries in front of the big land in the west, I sailed straight east, and then after some days I saw Snæfellsjökull. It's a famous volcanic mountain in the west of Iceland. It's snow-capped, and you can see it from something like 200 kilometers out in sea. It's a landmark. So Eirik knew that if he started by this volcanic mountain and sailed straight west, and he could see how high the sun was over the horizon. He could measure that he could follow the same height in the map, and he could go straight to the west from this mountain, and he knew he would discover this new country. And it was also another man called Snæbjørn Galte. Just some years before, he had been to this country, Greenland, and he actually spent a winter on the east coast of Greenland. So he knew was something there, but he didn't know if it was possible to live there, because Snæbjørn Galte, who was the second cousin of Eirik's wife, Tjodhild, he said it's only snow and ice. We had no food for our animals. So when Eirik hit the country, he just followed the coast to the south. And as it says in one sentence in the saga, that he would try to look for a place it was possible to live. And then, of course, he crossed over to the west side of Greenland. And he would find there the green fjords, which is today what they call southern Greenland. And the fjords there are more or less, I've been there in and out in all these fjords, and it's more or less like in southwestern Norway. For Eirik the Red, it would have been like coming home to his childhood Norway. So and that's also why he called it Greenland, and it is in the summer. It is a green land. We could have thousands of sheep out in the fields in southwestern Greenland. So, but it was only one ship, and he stayed away for 3 years because he was an outlaw in 3 years from Iceland. And he built up a farm in the southwest in what is then called Eiriksfjord, and his farm was in Brattalid. But these 3 years, he himself was not too interested in the farming life in the south, because he spent his time going further and further up north, all the way up to the Disco Island. Up to and even further north, up to 71 degrees north, into the ice. And before then, all the historians, they've said that, well, this must have been a bluff. He must have been interested in the farming life in the south, and it's just they don't know why should he, because going from his farm in the south, Brattalid, up to the Disco Island is like going from in Norway today, from Oslo up to North Cape.
Right.
It's very long, and no one's been there before. But I think it was to find the walrus and the ivory from the walrus.
And
Because,
as it's mentioned, I think it's worth mentioning as well that and this is mentioned repeatedly in the Black Viking, but which I'm trying to read at the moment, and it's worth mentioning that walrus was one of the biggest businesses, so to speak, in the Viking Age, with sail to Europe and the rest of Europe, because when the Muslims took over the North Africa, they closed kind of the sail for elephant, but I don't remember the English word for it, but the mammoth, not mammoth teeth, but the elephant teeth. And so walrus became one of the biggest businesses in the Viking Age for the Vikings to sell to the rest of Europe.
Yes, because this was this ivory from the elephant.
That's it. Yeah,
it's like someone scientists, they compare this to plastic in our day, because it's very plastic. You could form it very easily, and it's very strong. So to making sculptures, to making or chess pieces, for instance, you would use this ivory. And then they closed the exploitation from Africa, and they had to replace it, and they found the walrus teeth, tusks, and they also called that ivory, as from the elephant.
right.
And they replaced it successfully with that material. And in the Black Viking, they hunt down all the walruses in Iceland, so there's no one left. And this is this family in charge of this is of course the Black Viking, but it's also the family of Eirik the Red's wife, Tjodhild. And where they hunted the walrus, it's exactly where Eirik the Red and his father had his farm in Strandir, up north in Iceland. So he would have known about all this, and he would have known these walruses had disappeared. And where did they go? Probably west or north. So
away from people, I reckon.
Away from people, and I think that was his plan all the way, because when he leaves Iceland, he says to his friends, "Well, when I come back, I'm going to help you." So it's like he knows he's going to achieve something in this new country. And when he spent his 3 years as an outlaw, going up north, further and further north, it's because he's looking after something up there. And new science says that the walrus teeth, the ivory in Europe, if you take out today from museums, from chess pieces or anything, you could take out the isotopes from the material, and you can find out where did these walrus, where did they live, because you could find out what they ate. And now, just some years ago, they found out that, well, it's in the Disco area in Greenland, and it came ivory walrus teeth from there, from around the year 1000. And the only solution is that it's from Eirik the Red and his society in North Greenland, in Western Greenland. And the reason, when after 3 years he goes back to Iceland again, but not to settle in Iceland, because he used then the whole winter to try to convince people to go with him back to Greenland.
Right.
And it's a success, because the summer after, he's followed by altogether there are 25 big ships and 800 people. And Iceland this period might have been just 15,000-20,000 the population. So 800, that's a lot of people. And this is again not poor people. This is people with the big ships today, like millionaire ships. And they sell their big farms, many of them, in Iceland, and follow Eirik the Red, the recent outlaw, over to Greenland, because of what must be something valuable that he has discovered in Greenland. And then they set up a society, because southwestern Greenland, all the area up to Disco, it's got no population at this time.
We should mention as well that during the travel from Iceland to Greenland, there is an accident at sea that many people drown as well.
So it might take a week, the whole travel, because when they hit the landmass in the east, Greenland, they didn't call it Greenland. They said that they're halfway over to Greenland. So what they call Greenland is the green fjords on the western side of the island. And this crossing from Iceland to the ice on the east coast is very risky. You see it all through the history of North Greenland, that it's very risky. So people, they don't just sell their farms, give up their life in Iceland for something. They also risk the journey over. And it's described as when the 25 ships go out, when they're close to Greenland, it comes 3 great waves, maybe tsunamis, and 11 of the ships that just disappear in the sea. So out of 800 going out from Iceland, just 450 people, they arrive at the western side of this new country. And then each chieftain, he takes land, and he gets 1 fjord each. So it's called Herjolfs fjord, because one of the chieftains is called Herjolf, and Eiriks fjord, and Einars fjord. So 1 big fjord each. And of course, they got 1 big ship with up to 40-50 people in 1 ship, and they start the society in 1 fjord. And there is a big society with all the fjords, and all the chieftains with their men, they meet at the Thing meeting, the small parliament, just to sort out the big society. And this is how they built a free state from the bottom, and from nothing, because this area, it's been populated by people from America, actually people coming over from Siberia for thousands of years. And the last inhabitants in this area in Greenland, southwest, is the Dorset people, but they left this area in 200 AD, so 700-800 years before. So it's empty. So they could take land and build this society from nothing, and they had no enemies at all. Except from the strong winters and so on. But the climate would have been quite warm, and more or less as today, maybe a bit more warmer than today. So but it would get colder some centuries later. So and this society, they built it up with chieftains in the fjords, and they exported walrus tusks, walrus teeth, from the hunting in the summer up in the north. And this society survived for 500 years. The same period of time as from Christopher Columbus until Donald Trump.
And we should mention as well, because I didn't know you have a train to catch today. So I sorry, I fell out a bit there, but I'm gonna try to repeat it, because I do know you have a train to catch, so you have to move on. And of course, the inevitable Christianization of Greenland, as you mentioned in the beginning, is a fascinating story, because this Eirik's wife eventually, because she can become Christian, she refuses to sleep with him because he's still a pagan. He refuses to bow down to Christianity.
Yeah, that's where his son Leif Eirikson, or Leif the Lucky, he's involved, and the king I started with, Olaf Tryggvason, because Leif, he's the oldest son of Eirik the Red, is Torstein. So he's home at the farm and hunting up north with his father. And Leif, he buys a big ship and he goes to Norway, and he then goes in the army in under this Olav Tryggvason, and then he asks him, could you go to Greenland and Christianize them? And then he drifts off course and he hits a land he's never been there before, as it's said in the saga. And it's wine grapes there, and big timber, and barley, and so on. So he discovers Greenland when he's really trying to bring Christianity to Greenland. And when he comes back eventually to Greenland, his father is negative to this new Christianity. So he says no. But his mother, Tjodil, she built a church there in Brattalid, Eirik the Red's farm. And then Tjodil says that, well, I want to sleep with you as long as you're a pagan. So that's the story. And after that, they got several. They start. They more or less, the problem with the south western Greenland is it's more or less no trees, so they got no timber, and they got it's not possible to produce iron. That's a problem. And they got no
lumber.
No, and they a very important part of the Viking society is the beer, the drinking. And drinking parties. Because every chieftain is supposed to have a big party with lots of beer, and but it's not possible to produce beer in Greenland.
Right.
But all these things they are missing. The problem is that they have to rely on the ships coming from Iceland and Norway, and it's so expensive for them to buy what they need, iron, beer, and so on. And then they discovered a land with wine grapes, alcohol, that they could use to replace the beer for having these big parties that is expected of a chieftain. And it's timber, and of course it's possible to produce iron in this new country that discovered further west. And that's why Eirik the Red and his children, they are interested in creating a colony in this new country. And in his lifetime, after the first discovery by Leif, it's a big expedition that goes out in about 2003 with 3 big ships and with 160 people on board.
And we should I'm sorry for interrupting you there, but we should as well mention that he's quite old at this point. He's about 60 years at this time of age.
And that's probably why he stays at home. He doesn't follow this new colony, and it's headed by a man. 2 of his children, Eirik the Red's children, is participating. It's Thorvalder and his daughter Frøydis, and also his daughter-in-law Gudrid, which is quite famous. They go to find Greenland and to settle there, and they bring all kinds of animals and also got some ships that is supposed to go back to Greenland with the commodities that they need there. So but it's not a success, because they are used to, when they go to Faroe Islands, Iceland, Greenland, so on, just these areas they find, they're empty, no people. But then they realize it's full of people in this area in West, where the wine grapes grow.
The Native Americans, of course.
The Native Americans, and they says we got no chance, because the population in Greenland at the time, it might be just 1,300, and when they go 160, it's 10%, more than 10% of the population, just this expedition. And when they realize that the natives here, there are thousands, it's not worth the risk, so that they gave up the whole thing.
Imagine how different history would have been if they actually had settled down and made a colony in America. Imagine how different it would be then.
Yeah, but a lot of Americans today in the US, also in Canada, they believe it was so, that it was so, that they stayed there, and they believe there was a colony, a Norse colony in America in the 14th century, because they have a need for creating a past connected to themselves in America.
Right.
And when the Scandinavians went to America in the 19th century, they were a minority, and then they discovered, well, our ancestors, they've been here. They discovered this area 500 years before Columbus, and then you got these, but it's the only traces from these expeditions is on the northern tip of Newfoundland. That's Lance or Meadows, where it's three big longhouses in the Viking style, and they found nothing in the US. But of course, the need for finding something, finding a past connected to this saga world, something. The need is so strong that they invented some rune stones, like the Kensington stone, that is supposed to be from 1362, and all over a lot of places in Canada and in the US, you can, it's Viking festivals, and it's rune parks, and it's Vikings, and so someone calls this is the plastic Vikings.
Yeah.
But it's a modern phenomenon, but it's connected.
Like you said, we have to round up, because unfortunately we don't have the time, because like you said, you have a train to catch.
Yeah,
I could easily talk another hour about this, but before you go, do you have anything you want to promote, any social media you want to talk to? My guest today has been Øystein Morten, who has written Eirik the Red. If you're listening to this in Scandinavia or can read Norwegian, this book is an absolute must read, along with other books that he has written. So, but do you have any social media, anything you want to promote, and the links you want me to put in the description below?
No, it's just my name on Facebook. But my publisher and my agents, they're trying to sell it to a translation in English now, and I think it's already sold to Germany. So and it's supported by the state to try to fund the translation into English. So I really hope in next year or the year after it's possible to read Eirik the Red in English, because it's the only book about him written in since the sagas. So so I hope for that.
Yeah, crossing our fingers.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is Adam. This has been Well.H12. We are available on social media, on Instagram and Well.H12. You can find us on Twitter, Well.H12. So please like, share, and subscribe. Check out some other episodes that we have not written. And if you are on iTunes, please consider writing a little review. That would help us out a lot. My name is Alan, and I'll see you next time.